Good morning. It is Tuesday, January the 30th. I'm Ron. Welcome to Storytime. And again, good morning. Today, The Left's War on Free Speech by Kimberly Strassel from the April 2017 issue of Imprimis. I like to introduce the topic of free speech with an anecdote about my children. I have 3 kids, ages 12, 9, and 5. They are your average, normal kids, which means they live to annoy the heck out of each other. Last fall, sitting around the dinner table, the 12-year-old was doing a particularly good job at this with his younger sister. She finally grew so frustrated that she said, "Oliver, you need to stop talking. Forever." This inspired a volley of protests about free speech rights and ended up with them yelling, "Shut up," at each other. Desperate to stop the fighting and restore order, I asked each of them in turn to tell me what they thought free speech meant. The 12-year-old went first. A serious and academic child, he gave a textbook definition that included "Congress shall make no law," an evocation of James Madison, a tutorial on the Bill of Rights, and warnings about certain exceptions for public safety and libel. I was happy to know the private school fees were yielding something. The 9-year-old went next. A rebel, convinced that everyone ignores her, she said that she had no idea what public safety or libel were, but that it doesn't matter because free speech means there should never be any restrictions on anything that anybody says anytime or anywhere. She added that we could all start by listening more to what she says. Then it was the 5-year-old's turn. You could tell that she'd been thinking hard about her answer. She fixed both her brother and sister with a ferocious stare and said, "Free speech is that you can say what you want, as long as I like it." It was at this moment that I had one of those sudden insights as a parent. I realized that my oldest was a constitutional conservative, my middle child a libertarian, and my youngest a socialist with totalitarian tendencies. With that introduction, my main point today is that we've experienced over the past 8 years a profound shift in our political culture, a shift that has resulted in a significant portion of our body politic holding a 5-year-old's view of free speech. What makes this shift notable is that unlike most changes in politics, you can trace it back to one day, January 21st, 2010. The day the Supreme Court issued its Citizens United ruling and restored free speech rights to millions of Americans. For nearly 100 years up to that point, both sides of the political aisle had used campaign finance laws, I call them speech laws, to muzzle their political opponents. The right used them to push unions out of elections, and the left used them to push corporations out of elections. These speech laws kept building and building until we got the Mac Daddy of them all, McCain-Feingold. It was at this point the Supreme Court said, "Enough." A 5-judge majority ruled that Congress had gone way too far in violating the Constitution's free speech protections. The Citizens United ruling was reviewed as a blow for freedom by most on the right, which had in recent years gotten some free speech religion, but as an unmitigated disaster by the left. Over the decades, the left had found it harder and harder to win policy arguments and had come to rely more and more on these laws to muzzle political opponents. And here was the Supreme Court knocking back those laws, reopening the floodgates for nonprofits and corporations to speak freely again in the public arena. In the left's view, the ruling could not have come at a worse time. Remember the political environment in 2010. Democrats were experiencing an enormous backlash against the policies and agenda of the Obama administration. There were revolts over auto bailouts, stimulus spending, and Obamacare. The Tea Party movement was in full swing and vowing to use the midterm elections to effect dramatic change. Democrats feared an electoral tidal wave would sweep them out of Congress. In the weeks following the Citizens United ruling, the left settled on a new strategy. If it could no longer use speech laws against its opponents, it would do the next best thing. It would threaten, harass, and intimidate its opponents out of participation. It would send a message. Conservatives choosing to exercise their constitutional rights will pay a political and personal price. We've seen this strategy unfold in a coordinated fashion and using a variety of tactics since 2010. One tactic is the unleashing of federal and state bureaucracies on political opponents. The best example of this is the IRS targeting of conservative nonprofits. To this day, Obama acolytes and Senate Democrats characterize that targeting as a mistake by a few minor IRS employees in Cincinnati who didn't understand the law. That's a lie. Congress held several investigations of this targeting and found the truth is clear. In the months following the Citizens United ruling, President Obama delivered speech after speech on behalf of Democratic midterm candidates, repeating the same grave warning at each stop. Thanks to Citizens United, he would say, shadowy and scary organizations are flooding into our election. He suggested these organizations might be operating illegally and might be funded by foreign players. He noted that somebody should do something about it. These speeches act as a dog whistle to an IRS bureaucracy that was already primed to act. Former IRS official Lois Lerner was well aware of Democratic demands that the agency go after conservative Tea Party and nonprofit groups. Senate Democrats and left-wing interest groups had been sending letters to the agency for months, demanding it go after the very groups it ultimately went after. And Miss Lerner had her own biases. We know from her recoverable emails that put her politically and substantially in the anti-free speech camp. The result is that the IRS deliberately put some 400 conservative organizations representing tens of thousands of Americans on political ice for the 2010 and 2012 elections. It's hard not to believe that this was designed to help Democrats in those elections. We know that senior members of the Treasury Department were aware of the targeting abuse in early 2012 and took steps to try to slow it. Yet those officials did not inform Congress this was happening and chose not to divulge the abuse until well after that year's election. Another intimidation tactic is for prosecutors to abuse their awesome powers in order to hound and frighten political opponents. The most terrifying example of this was the John Doe probe in Wisconsin. Democratic prosecutors in Milwaukee launched a bogus criminal campaign finance investigation into some 30 conservative groups that supported the public sector union reforms championed by Governor Scott Walker. Wisconsin's John Doe law gave these prosecutors the right to conduct this investigation in secret and subject their individual targets to gag orders. Prosecutors secretly looked through these individuals' financial records, bank accounts, and emails. And that's the end of part one of The Left's War on Free Speech by Kimberly Strassel, which is adapted from a speech delivered on April 26, 2017 at Hillsdale College's Alan P. Kirby Jr. Center for Constitutional Studies and Citizenship in Washington, D.C., as part of the AWC Family Foundation Lecture Series. And it is in an issue of Imprimis, which is a publication of Hillsdale College, the April 2017 edition, Volume 46, Number 4. And Ms. Strassel writes the weekly Potomac Watch column for the Wall Street Journal, where she is also a member of the editorial board. A graduate of Princeton University, her previous positions at the Journal include news assistants in Brussels, internet reporter in London, commercial real estate reporter in New York, assistant editorial features editor, columnist for theopinionjournal.com, and senior editorial page writer. In 2013, she served as Pulliam Distinguished Visiting Fellow at Hillsdale College, and in 2014, she was a recipient of the Bradley Prize. She is the author of The Intimidation Game, How the Left is Silencing Free Speech. So tomorrow, which is going to be the 31st, I will again do another Storytime Extra, and then on Thursday, I will follow up with the part 2 to The Left's War on Free Speech. But until then, thank you very much for joining me, and have a great day.